The title of the show, Urban Ecology, as a concept is pretty descriptive. It's not necessarily a new idea, right? Exploring concepts of ecology and specifically nature within the urban setting. But certainly every year that's going to change, right? Technology is something that changes at a really fast pace. So it's always a concept you can return to and consider how every time we look at that, how is it redefining our concepts of, what is urban, what is ecological, right? What is nature? And so I really enjoyed the pieces that came together, how everyone had different perspectives on what that looks like now. And as an art historian, I've seen, I'm able to look back, right, take this long view of history and see how that definition has changed and also how it really hasn't changed, right? A lot of what I work with, so I work with, contemporary art and ecology in America, specifically in the continental United States. So a lot of that is really heavily implicated in 19th century early American landscape painting. And it's always been commercial, right? It's always been this commercial view of how man defines and creates boundaries of nature for our benefit. So I really like how the works in urban ecology are an attempt to rework our understanding of nature, right? The urban setting tends to push nature to the boundaries for convenience, right? For commercial convenience. We don't like pulling weeds. We like having access to natural settings without having to leave the city and go on these long hikes in the mountains, right? Even though we're so close. So I was considering the fact that art and ecology in America, it tends to focus on contemporary works that are recasting nature as this character in our history it's mutually exclusive from technology, right? Or from man-made spaces, when really nature is a very man-made concept. So we have these contemporary eco-centric artists, like the ones featured in Urban Ecology. They're questioning these definitions of what is natural and how are we retracing boundaries of nature and culture in order to adapt to our inseparable relationship from technology, right? We're always connected to it. It's always in our pocket. It's always underfoot. So in the current exhibition, curated by Art Park 21, hosted at the Santa Fe Rail Yards, our Urban Ecology becomes a collection of works that are exploring that idea. And the show, it hosts a variety of perspectives, and it's investigating how we're retracing perceptions of nature within this urban setting, right? It was very convenient. So we can use technology as a vehicle to redefine our relationship with those ever-changing concepts.
Embodied and sensorial research is always my primary method. Because I worked as a guide at Site Santa Fe for a while, I used to find refuge in the Railyard Park on my breaks, and I developed a relationship with the gardens over time. Observing the plants, like where the goldenrod and the yarrow entangle with one another and drop shadows onto the flagstone, was my initial inspiration. I also read about the history of the Railyard Park, the Conservancy, the designers, and their programs, and the community activism that brought the park into fruition. This research instilled in me the need to create a project that served as a platform for community voices, which are all presented in the plant zine.
My project, Root Walk, has a few different installations. The heart of the project is here in the community garden, where I'm planting a ground cover of yerba mansa, which is a really cool riparian plant that spreads rhizomatically. And it serves as a metaphor for the rest of the project. So I created a zine and compiled over 21 stories that were contributed to me by community members about plants that live here in the Railyard Park. And so the public can collect a zine from the zine library, which is located right here in the community garden, and then use it like a type of field guide to walk around the park and identify different plant species. Each plant that has a story that goes with it is marked with a flag that I made with plant dyes and then printed on them.
Also, while making the flags, I researched many methods for creating plant dyes and used over 15 plants for dyes on the flags. A lot of botanical research went into designing the prints on each flag, so they each reference different physiological elements of a plant, like the seed head, the leaf structure, or the flower, for example. Atrophy in relation to ideas about change and decay was an important theme for this project. I was interested in the type of change that is out of my control, like the degradation of the flags, and that is something I prepared for in the project. The concept of atrophy also related to knowledge and wisdom about plants. In my proposal, I identified the issue of what folks call plant blindness, which is the idea that society's attention has turned away from plants or been forced away from plants through colonialism, capitalism, and land displacement. And therefore, people have lost an ability to see and relate to plants, especially in urban spaces. So through the zine, I wanted to also support community members who have the lived knowledge and experience of working with and relating to plants, which each person in the zine does in their own way.
Hi, so we are TLC Art Collective. Our piece, our sculpture is titled Infinite Green. And this is a sculptural piece that's created from repurposed artificial grass. So the sculpture is basically two turf rolls, artificial turf rolls that are in two large spirals. And in the center of these two spirals is a flat platform, also with artificial grass, where a lawnmower is placed. The lawnmower was also repurposed. It's no longer functional, but it's been upcycled into a sculptural piece now. It's also covered in the same material of artificial grass. And this is an interactive piece. So viewers can actually step onto the platform and they can pretend to mow this plasticized grass in sort of this futile and humorous performative act. So we want to raise questions about lawn care, lawn maintenance, especially in more arid climates like the southwestern United States. What is this view of the idealized American dream and how that plays out in this picturesque look of a grassy green lawn? And where does that picturesque ideal really come from? We found some statistics about the vast amount of resources that are put into lawn care and turf grass maintenance within the United States. And some of those numbers are $60 billion spent per year on turf grass maintenance and 20 trillion gallons of water per year to maintain it. So pretty staggering numbers.
Thinking of performance and interaction and knowing that this sculpture was going to be in a park accessible to viewers of all ages, demographics, and experience when it comes to looking at art, we wanted something that was really accessible, that anyone could be able to step up onto that platform. And so the way that the sculpture has been designed, it's a feel that seems playful. It's pink and green. It feels almost like a toy. And in this case, you as a viewer can go and stand up and, as described earlier, be a part of the sculpture. And in a way, the way that within land care comes in, actually like testing it out, seeing what that mower feels like, but realizing that when you mow your yard, it's a never ending process because the second one's done mowing, it's growing again. And so the idea of infinite green is thinking about like this almost like continual cycle that we participate in and questioning, well, why did that cycle even start? And so by creating something that on the outset feels toy-like, but then the overall concept is actually much deeper. We wanted to be able to hit audiences on more than one level, to be able to unfold that dialogue in both a playful way, but in also a very serious way.
We knew kind of big picture about the landscape and the climate, but it wasn't until we got to the site to do the installation where we saw exactly where our piece was going to be within the park. And it's just next to the area that they are doing the native grass restoration work, which is so cool to see. I mean, as a landscape architect, right? Like concerned with water use in arid landscapes, and also not only that, but habitat restoration. That's the other thing. I mean, Leticia mentioned earlier about the time it goes into mowing. Then there's also the gas for the mowers, but then there's the water that goes into irrigating it. And then finally the habitat value or lack thereof with this monoculture grass, or maybe it's a couple varieties, but it just doesn't have, it's one, not what would be native to the area, what would be naturally growing as far as grasses at this park site, before us humans came along. So to see that the park is restoring it to something that is appropriate for the natural environment, the native climate of Santa Fe, is so exciting to see, because it's not just us humans, it's about the birds and the bees and the whole ecological system.
Well, my name's Richard Lowenberg, and I live in La Mesilla, north of Santa Fe, near Española, and I call myself an information ecologist. And that's actually been the subject of a lifelong body of work, has been what I call information ecology. And mushroom economics involves people finding lots of little Amanita ceramic mushrooms in Railyard Park, and during the summer of 2021 in other public places around Santa Fe. And these mushrooms have a little message rolled up in the stem, and the little message tells people to call a phone number or check out a website or scan a QR code, which allows the website to know the ultimate zip code destination of these mushrooms. And over the course of the summer, there will be hundreds of these little amanitas found in public places unexpectedly. And I hope people forage them and respond to the little message and keep the mushroom as a gift. This is a little, mushroom economics is about the analogy between fungal networks and our new green economic networks. How does economics work? How do people exchange and share and create value? So the background to this project and the research behind it, again, focuses or comes from my overarching interest in what I call information ecology. Many people think of ecology almost as just as a biological science, but ecology is a whole systems understanding and includes understandings of the relationship between matter, energy, and information. But if we think about ecology generally, it has huge impact upon our thinking about economics, about value, and what we value and how we value things beyond just material resources. I don't think we can address our ecological problems that we know of and express as climate change, population increase, improper distribution of resources. I don't think we can address those issues without being what I would call eco-minded. Mushrooms and fungal networks are increasingly of interest now in the public realm, in books and articles that are being written, and there's some lovely new research and writing going on about the nature of fungal networks, about how mushrooms feed the soil and can create chemical and communicative relationships and energy relationships with other plants, especially trees. And exchange of carbon and replacing photosynthesis to create nutrients and so on. So this project touches on those concepts. It's purely a metaphorical concept, mushroom economics.
We are a collaborative team who work together to build non-picture, these plinth and poem cap pieces. I'm Nicholas B. Jacobsen.
I'm Catherine Pacheris. I'm Bud Carlson.
So as we started this project, we all came up here together and spent some time just wandering around the park and looking and reading. And when we came upon one of the signs, which is a metal plaque that is etched into a boulder, and it's thanking one of the founding families of this area, the settler town Santa Fe, and one of the members of that family is listed as not pictured. So we began talking to each other about what other parts of this park and its history as land are also not pictured.
The other piece of research that we were sort of working on was the engineering of the rammed earth and poured earth. So we experimented with different materials and where we would be able to use this method in order to create the plinths.
And then there was material research also into the caps, which this is the third iteration of caps. They started in metal and then plastic, and now they are in ceramic.
The site specificity of this project was essential to these pieces because each of our texts, the poems on the caps, point to a certain aspect of the park, whether it be plant, animal, mineral, historical. And so for us, the urban natural overlap that's entangled in places like parks is the thing we wanted people to look at.
So one of the things that's been really interesting about this process, because of course, ultimately, I mean, we're being asked to imagine that these are objects, but actually they're processes. So the earth is continually moving and changing, and we've had the literal experience of having the caps change as they've been sort of interacted with and demolished by people who are using the park in certain kinds of ways. And so we've had kind of a layering of experiences that kind of mirrors the way that parks themselves are layered onto land. So this land, 35 years ago was industrial. Had been a rail yard, and it's become a conservation easement, which makes it a whole different set of responsibilities and rules and arrangements. And that was part of what we were interacting with in the process of creating this. And then, of course, the land itself now has a growing, living set of inhabitants, some human, mostly non-human, and they're all interacting with this space. So it's kind of, if you think of it as like a stacked set of layers, there are all these layers, and some of them below ground are things like the irrigation or the kinds of utilities that might cross through here, but they're also the bedrock, and they're also the history, and they're the footsteps of people who moved through this space 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years ago. But then layered on top of that is the park as it exists now, and the industrial past as it existed before. And we like to think of all those layers as sort of maybe being expressed by the idea of the rammed earth and the layers in that, and then the idea of us trying to find voices or do the kind of incomplete communication of sort of imagining or projecting into the non-human denizens of the park.
This installation is constructed of salvage materials, and the ostensible purpose of the artwork is to keep a small amount of water in the pocket on the top of the rock. There are two ways of releasing water onto the rock. One is auto release, the other is a manual release. And there are two sources of water for the rock: the catchment up at the top of the installation, and then which contains rainwater, and the yellow tank, which contains tap water. There is a program that has the system monitor the pocket on the rock, and every 48 hours we'll check to see if there's water on the rock, and we'll release water if there isn't. And in between times, if the pocket is dry, the visitor can come by and release water by pushing a button on the control panel on the back. My research for this project included reading essays about urban ecology and related topics, as well as reviewing publications that I had on environmental art. Urban ecology has been described as biology and technology intertwined. I found that these themes resonated with much of my studio work, which has as a subtext the interaction of natural and industrial materials. I discovered a description of the happening by Alan Capro entitled Easy. This happening took place in a dry arroyo in Southern California. Cal Arts student participants were given a cup of water and told to pick up a small rock, wet it with the water, and walk down the arroyo until it was dry, and then drop the rock, pick up another rock, and wet it, and walk until it was dry. The participants became more aware of temperature, wind, humidity, and were sensitized to ways their behavior affected the rate of water evaporation. The description of this happening inspired the concept of my A Drop of Water installation. Easy used elemental ingredients like stone and water, and I have a fondness for making use of and reference to basic elements of our environment. The work, on one level, is a performance collaboration between the artwork's technology and the visitor. Through the auto-release and the manual release of small amounts of water, the technology and the visitor combine efforts to achieve the ostensible goal of the artwork. Thanks to a site suggested by the Railyard Park Conservancy and the Railyard Art Project Committee, this work has a location in the park where it makes perfect site-specific sense. The Leticias and the general verticality of the piece connect with the adjacent trees and the vertical components of the nearby promenade pergola structure. The boulder in the installation connects well with other boulders in this arroyo portion of the park. Viewing the work from the south looking north, the background is a large tangle of power poles, light poles, traffic lights, and assorted cables and lines. This reinforces the subtext of the work, combining natural and industrial materials, and the show, Urban Ecologies.
Well, this is a 1,400-pound steel gas tank that is now decommissioned and become a kaleidoscope. And inside there is a video recording that forms the image of the kaleidoscope. It's gasoline and roses swirling together, and it then catches on fire, and it's about our romance with destruction in the name of progress. And the role of interaction is very important to my work. I do a lot of interactive pieces, and I like the idea of discovery and rewarding inquisitive people for being curious. And this piece is just a ready-made. If you just were to walk by it, it just exists on a podium in that fashion. But if you're inquisitive and you look inside, you get rewarded with this beautiful kaleidoscope that, I don't know, hopefully takes you out of your daily life for a second. It kind of blends in immediately being next to this industrial building, but then with the path in the park located right behind the sculpture, it has the juxtaposition with nature. And so working with all steel and everything, I just worked with materials that would live up outside and tried to find a placement that would make it look intentional. For scale with this work, I just went as big as I could, but I really like it. I think if I had chosen a smaller tank, it wouldn't have had the same impact that it does here, sitting like so out of place. hopefully drawing people in to investigate it.
This is a memorial to the forests that surround us here in New Mexico. It's a very temporary piece that uses homemade chalk that has phosphorescence in it, and basically with a script that reads, facing the Sangre de Cristos, I can read like a clock from here that my flesh and bones are somehow parceled with the bulging forests that surround us. So this particular project, though, reflects on the diaspora of the Douglas fir that was harvested from Jicarita Peak near Peñasco at the end of the 19th century to supply ties for the AT&SF railroad. And so lots of research, for years. I grew up next to the railroad tracks here in Belen, where I live right now and taking care of an elderly parent. And so the railroad tracks have always been a really huge source of a primary source of inspiration for me, and also the physical reality of it, and the history, the politics about it. And then I lived for 30 years near Peñasco. I make art to connect with other humans. So in that way, interaction, however we define that, is primary,
My hope, though, is for the public to carry with them the stories of plant relations that they learn about in the zine, as I do now, in order to deepen their connection to plants in the region. All of the plants in the zine are defined by the Rio Grande watershed. There are questions also at the end of the zine for participants to use as prompts to write their own plant story if they wish to do so, which I ended up doing once I finished the project, and I really recommend. It's really fun. I also encourage the public to learn more about the contributors to the zine and their exemplary plant-human relations. But my main goal is for people to find connection to each other through their interests and their relationships with plants.
The biggest concept that we would really like for the viewers of our piece to consider or reconsider is what is the ideal aesthetic of our lawns or our public spaces?
Thinking about Santa Fe and also the Conservancy at Railway Park, by thinking about all of the dialogue that's already underway, by being able to bring in this component where people could engage again with these wheels that can be sat on, that can be played with and touched, but then also to again question, why are we on this path? And is there any other path? Maybe we need to change the path.
I think we need to practice earth economics, that the place we live on is telling us what it wants in terms of life being in balance, life sustaining itself, evolving, being interdynamic with other living things. The earth tells us this, and all we have to do is pay attention and try to be in tune.
A lot of our poems, as well as the plinths themselves being made out of earth and material, are asking people to look at what's overlooked. We're just asking them to look again, to think twice about your baseline assumptions and ideas, whether the ones presented through the signage or through your own experience that you bring to spaces like this park. It's more of just asking you to look. So I guess the learning is there, but it's more asking you to find the thing you're interested in learning just by looking toward spaces that you would often ignore.
Water is the basis of life. The movement of water across this planet is the basis for a habitable environment. These patterns of water movement are being disrupted, with flooding and droughts the result. Water is something finite and is constantly being recycled, something that connects all living things. In the Southwest, we have a special relationship with water due to its scarcity. While this work connects with that idea, I would hope that the visitor might extrapolate that connection to be reminded that, like the finite quantity of water that we all share, there is a finite ecosystem that we all share as well and are all intertwined with. Our challenge is to achieve a balance between the ecosphere and the technosphere.
So for me, this work, what I'm trying to get across with it is, I don't want anybody to learn or unlearn anything. I want to question things, and this work is about our romance with progress and destruction, and specifically through fossil fuels and how that relates to our natural world. And so when you look inside the kaleidoscope, there's gas and roses swirling together, and really want to just people to question the things that we've normalized about our interaction with nature.
That harvesting that occurred to get those rails in. So it was, again, it's a memorial to those harvested trees, sort of like trying to imagine them being harvested, trying to approach this as a thesis that speaks to the argument against anthropocentrism, that we could perhaps, even though we are created with certain devices that we see the world through, that are different from the way a tree perhaps experiences the world, but still that we could possibly experience something.
As a participating artist in this exhibition, as well as director of Art Park 21, I would like to express my gratitude to all those who made this show possible. Thanks to Kat Hulshoff for envisioning the urban ecologies theme for the show. This is profoundly relevant to the Art Park 21 mission and to art today. It has been a pleasure to work with Shannon Palermo and Catherine York of the Railyard Park Conservancy. Their oversight, coordination, and patience through this process was invaluable. The support and endorsement of the Railyard Art Project Committee were a crucial first step in making this show happen. And many thanks to my fellow creatives. It has been a privilege to exhibit in your company and learn from your vision. We hope that this video keeps this experience alive and allows many more to be inspired by this work. This exhibition was made possible in part through funding from the New Mexico Humanities Council.